Hi, welcome back to Halloween House. So we're continuing on with our long story of Rodney Alcala.
In our last video, we discussed his cross-country road trip going back from New York City to LA and the murder of Christine Ruth Thornton.
Yes, so at this point we are in 1977 and Alcala will remain in the LA area. Besides the secretive trips to the Seattle area where he had a storage locker and where he committed possible unknown crimes in the Seattle area, which we also discussed in the previous video. This is where he would eventually be arrested for the murder of Robin Samso, which would get him off the streets for good.
Mm-hmm. At this point, he's 34 years old, and he's beginning what is believed to be his most active years as a serial killer. He currently has 3 murder victims and 3 surviving victims.
At this point, that we know of.
Mm-hmm.
So saying these are his most active years is really just a guess. How many women he murdered in LA before returning for the final time remains to be unknown and will likely remain unknown.
We got to remember the authorities have estimated his total number of victims to be between 50 and 130.
So 4 young women were killed in the Los Angeles, California area between 1977 and 1979.
And they included Jill Barkum, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parenthau.
And their cases would go cold until 2003 when Alcala was forced to give a sample of his DNA and dental impressions, and his DNA was submitted to CODIS in 2003, which tied him to the 4 murders.
He did get convicted in 2010, and bite mark impressions further tied him to these 4 cases, as well as Cornelia Crilly, who was murdered in New York June 24th, 1971.
Yes, so we did discuss her case in a previous video, and we'll provide a link in the previous videos in the description below.
Jill Barkum was 18 years old when her body was found November 11th, 1977. She was the daughter of Maurice and Joyce Barkum, and she grew up in Oneida, New York. She had 5 brothers and 5 sisters. She was set to graduate from high school in 1977, but decided to leave New York to go to Los Angeles. And she was only in LA for 3 weeks before she was found murdered.
And another victim... Oh, we're on the same one. I'm so sorry. Jill would eventually be found on Franklin Canyon Drive, which is in West Los Angeles. She was beaten, strangled, and assaulted. And during the 28 years of her murder being unsolved, she was always believed to be the victim of the Hillside Stranglers. What we know now are stranglers, plural. At the time,
they thought it was one.
One, yeah. But biological evidence was recovered from the crime scene and preserved.
And through advancements in DNA and those key suspects, Angelo Bono and Kenneth Bianchi, sorry. They are now known to be the serial killer team known as the Hillside Stranglers. They were eliminated from the suspect list.
Yes. So when the DNA profile that they had preserved was uploaded to California Offender DNA Index System database known as CODIS, which we just mentioned, the comparison was returned with a hit on Alcala.
So another victim, Georgia Wickstead, she was a cardiac nurse. She was in the middle child between 2 other siblings, and she was raised by a widowed mother. When she was a young girl, she went through a series of operations, and these operations inspired her to become a nurse. At the age of 27, on December 16th, 1977, she was found murdered in her Malibu apartment. She had been assaulted, bludgeoned with a hammer, and was strangled with a nylon stocking.
And the third LA victim was Charlotte Lamb, and she was born and raised in Ohio with 7 siblings. Her parents were farmers. Her nickname was Shug, and that was short for sugar because she had such a sweet disposition. She moved to Los Angeles shortly after graduating high school, and she worked as a legal secretary. She was 32-year-old when her body was found in the laundry room of a large apartment complex in El Segundo, California on June 24th, 1978. But she had no ties to this complex.
Yeah, she wasn't a resident, and attempts to find any resident she might have been visiting led nowhere. So it's still a really big mystery as to how she ended up there.
Yeah, and she would remain a Jane Doe for 3 weeks before she was finally identified, and she was assaulted and strangled with a shoelace.
Another victim, Jill Parenthau, worked as a keyboard operator. She's described by friends as being smart and funny, but shy around people she's not familiar with.
And she was found murdered in her apartment on June 13th, 1979. She was only 21 years old.
And sometime shortly before the murder, she went to a bar that Alcala regularly frequented. And a friend that was with Jill remembers having a brief conversation with him at that bar.
But that connection wouldn't be made until decades later. It's believed that Alcala stalked her to find out where she lived and that she lived alone.
And he gained entry into her apartment by forcing a window open, and then she was assaulted and strangled.
Yeah. So we're going to leave off here, and in our next video we're going to talk about another surviving victim of Alcala, which would be the fourth known surviving victims. We'll also discuss his infamous appearance on the dating game show.
Yep.
So thank you for tuning in. Stay spooky.